centering our focus for this presentation. So our focus is going to be on the neurocircuitry, and that kind of surrounds our understanding of psychopathology a little bit differently from addressing behavioral issues, chemical imbalances, towards more of this neurological, physiological realm that relatively remains untapped, um, and using neurofeedback for that piece. And so to begin that, I am going to talk a little bit about the brain, and a lot of this will be quite a basic introduction into um, how we understand the brain, how things kind of become solidified, and how it can lead into dysregulation, where neurofeedback fits in within that. So when it comes to the brain, we have these nerve cells within the brain, and these are called neurons, and they're messengers within the brain that help communicate with the body, the brain. It helps us to do everything from breathing, talking, eating, walking, balancing. And a lot of these things are out of our like conscious awareness, or something that we actively focus on. And when these aren't working as well as they should, we feel out of balance. And so neurofeedback does speaks to these neurons and can change how they're performing. So the goal is, when the brain performs a little bit better, people may start feel a little bit better as well. And in this, in our neurofeedback, we use an EEG, which is a neuroimaging technique that is designed to measure the electrical activity within the brain. And it looks at a range between like 0 and 100 hertz, and our brain cares about all of these frequencies or signals. And you can see here in this graph a couple of frequencies, what it looks like on a chart when an EEG measures brain activity. And so in a very basic way, I will illustrate how kind of dysregulation can become quite rigid. And it starts off with kind of an understanding that our brain, our nervous systems, they're wired for survival and to detect threats. And so in any given moment, oops, someone's in the waiting room. One sec. Okay, so in any given moment, we might experience stress, and each of these experiences lead us to feel maybe physically or emotionally unsafe. And so the brain goes into protective mode. And the younger we are, the more vulnerable we are. So, because we're more dependent on care. And some of these stressors include, like more significant stressors include accidents, shock accidents, like car accidents, brain injuries, concussions, assault, or developmental and relational trauma. So chronic adversity, abuse, neglect, those sorts of things. And on a sidebar, when it comes to neurofeedback, we are talking about brain optimization. So optimizing kind of how the brain talks to itself, and anyone can benefit from this. And I'm going a little bit more into the nervous system dysregulation when things kind of go awry, because these are sort of the sorts of people that we might see kind of coming into the clinic, and some of the reasons why they are. So sometimes there are chronic stressors that affect someone's nervous system. And looking at our brain and how our body responds to stressors, we turn to the autonomic nervous system, which is responsible for regulating these bodily functions. You can see on the right side here, it's very small, but kind of all the organs that are connected to the autonomic nervous system. And when we are faced with stress, this autonomic nervous system of defense can be activated. So, like the fight, flight, freeze responses. And what's important is that we can flexibly move between states of arousal, or states of responses. And that is kind of the key to regulation, so that whenever we encounter a stressor, we can adapt and match so that we're not overwhelmed. And some people may be familiar with this image on the bottom left, which is the window of tolerance. And in the window of tolerance, this optimal green zone represents the state where we can face stressors with relative ease. And when we're in chronic states of defense due to ongoing stressors or any number of reasons, this can shrink the window, which means we go into kind of this too high or maybe too low zone. Um, and more, we can become more easily triggered into defense. And these patterns can become learned. And there's a couple of basic ways that our brains can fail to self regulate and get stuck into these patterns. So, one of the states is high levels of arousal or hyperarousal, where people experience like anxiety, reactivity, difficulty falling asleep, or low arousals or hypoarousal. So, people can be more numb, experience fatigue, maybe alexithymia. Just 1 second. Admitting somebody. We are growing. And this last piece is interesting. It's more of the brain can sometimes spiral on its own and become increasingly sensitive, detecting danger and triggering a response even when there's no danger present. And this sensitivity may look like seizures, more of this physical symptoms like IBS, migraines, or panic attacks. And kind of to reiterate some of the things that people might then come into a clinic or to seek help for is are these symptoms of anxiety, agitation, insomnia, and they may be ongoing or they may also be precipitated or kind of triggered by something, a major life event or a stressor. And so having this chronically dysregulated autonomic nervous system can really feel like it's a cycle that's impossible to break. And so it feels like some maybe symptoms come out of nowhere. And oh, sorry, one more person. So where do we go from here? And I think there is a shift. I'm noticing a shift currently into people noticing and valuing more somatic approaches, which is likely why we're all here today as well, to learn more about what is out there. And so there are ways to repattern the nervous system and breaking out of these cycles and to support the process of healing. And so in this image here, the top down, this is something we're more familiar with, um, kind of the talk therapy. We look at how the mind interprets information, kind of building skills or building a coherent narrative comes to trauma. And when it comes to neurofeedback, there's this bottom up approach where we're starting from these originating sensations that have been patterned, solidified, practiced, and learned by the nervous system, and targeting that piece. And it is importantly to know outside of our conscious awareness. So, neurofeedback is that bottom up approach, which is agnostic to client history or narrative, but it can help us understand what they're experiencing. And with neurofeedback, can help restore that autonomic balance. So, it's about training the brain to find its optimal capacity or finding its own capacity for regulation.